The Battle of Fredericksburg, a comprehensive analysis. The Battle of Fredericksburg, fought from December 11 to December 15, 1862, stands as one of the most significant and tragic engagements of the American Civil War. It was a stark reminder of the brutal realities of war, showcasing the devastating consequences of poor leadership, strategic miscalculations, and the sheer human cost of conflict. This article delves into the intricate details of the battle, exploring its causes, key events, major figures, and lasting impact on the Civil War and American history. The prelude to battle. The strategic context of the Civil War in late 1862. By late 1862, the American Civil War had been raging for over a year and a half. The Union and the Confederacy were locked in a deadly struggle, with neither side able to deliver a decisive blow. The Union, under President Abraham Lincoln, was determined to preserve the United States and abolish slavery, while the Confederacy, led by President Jefferson Davis, sought to secure its independence and maintain its way of life. The Eastern theater of the war, particularly in Virginia, had seen a series of bloody engagements, including the First Battle of Bull Run, the Peninsula Campaign, and the Second Battle of Bull Run. The Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, commanded by General Robert E. Lee, had achieved several significant victories, boosting Southern morale and complicating Union efforts to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond. The Union's need for a victory. The Union Army of the Potomac, under the command of Major General George B. McClellan, had experienced mixed results. While McClellan had successfully repelled Lee's invasion of Maryland at the Battle of Antietam in September 1862, his failure to pursue and destroy Lee's army had frustrated Lincoln and other Union leaders. Lincoln, desperate for a decisive victory that could turn the tide of the war, replaced McClellan with Major General Ambrose Burnside in November 1862. Burnside, a relatively inexperienced commander, was tasked with developing a new strategy to defeat Lee and capture Richmond. His plan involved a rapid movement towards Fredericksburg, a key town on the Rappahannock River, from which he could launch an offensive against Richmond. The Confederate position. Lee, aware of Burnside's intentions, moved his army to Fredericksburg to block the Union advance. The town's strategic location made it an ideal defensive position. The Rappahannock River provided a natural barrier, and the surrounding terrain offered numerous advantages for the defending Confederate forces. Lee's army, though outnumbered, was well entrenched and prepared for a defensive battle. The Confederate commander had confidence in his troops and the strength of his position, believing that he could repel any Union assault. The opposing forces. The Union Army of the Potomac. The Army of the Potomac was one of the largest and most well-equipped armies in the world at the time. Under Burnside's command, it consisted of several corps, each led by experienced officers. The Union forces were well supplied and had access to advanced weaponry, including rifled muskets and artillery. However, the army was also plagued by internal divisions and a lack of cohesive leadership. Burnside's appointment had been controversial, and many of his subordinates doubted his abilities. Additionally, the Army's morale was low following the inconclusive results of previous campaigns. The Confederate Army of Northern Virginia. The Army of Northern Virginia, commanded by Lee, was a formidable force despite being smaller and less well-equipped than its Union counterpart. Lee's army was composed of veteran soldiers who had fought in several major battles, and they were highly motivated to defend their homeland. Lee's leadership was a key factor in the Army's effectiveness. He was supported by a cadre of talented officers, including Lieutenant General James Longstreet and Lieutenant General Thomas Stonewall Jackson. The Confederate forces were also familiar with the terrain around Fredericksburg, giving them an additional advantage. The role of logistics and supply logistics played a crucial role in the lead-up to the Battle of Fredericksburg. The Union Army's ability to move quickly and supply its troops was hampered by poor weather conditions and inadequate infrastructure. Burnside's plan relied on the rapid construction of pontoon bridges to cross the Rappahannock River, but delays in the arrival of the necessary equipment slowed the Union advance. In contrast, the Confederate Army was able to utilize the existing road network and supply lines to reinforce its position at Fredericksburg. Lee's troops were well prepared for a prolonged engagement, with ample supplies of food, ammunition, and other necessities. The Battle of Fredericksburg. The crossing of the Rappahannock River. The Battle of Fredericksburg began on December 11, 1862, with the Union Army's attempt to cross the Rappahannock River. Burnside had planned to use pontoon bridges to facilitate the crossing, but delays in the arrival of the bridges gave the Confederates time to prepare their defenses. Union engineers worked tirelessly to construct the bridges under heavy fire from Confederate sharpshooters positioned in the town of Fredericksburg. The crossing was further complicated by the presence of ice in the river, which made the operation even more dangerous. Despite these challenges, the Union forces eventually succeeded in crossing the river and establishing a foothold on the southern bank. However, the delay in the crossing had allowed Lee to reinforce his positions and prepare for the impending Union assault. The assault on Marye Heights. The main Union attack on December 13 focused on Marye Heights, a prominent ridge to the west of Fredericksburg. The Confederate forces, under Longstreet's command, had constructed a series of defensive positions along the base of the heights, including a stone wall that provided excellent cover for the defending troops. Burnside ordered a series of frontal assaults against the Confederate positions, despite the obvious disadvantages of such an approach. The Union troops, advancing across open ground, were subjected to devastating artillery and rifle fire from the entrenched Confederates. Wave after wave of Union soldiers were cut down as they attempted to breach the Confederate defenses. The fighting was intense and bloody, with little progress made by the Union forces. By the end of the day, the Union Army had suffered heavy casualties, and the Confederate positions remained largely intact. The fighting on the southern flank. While the main Union assault was directed at Marye Heights, additional fighting occurred on the southern flank of the battlefield. Union forces under Major General William B. Franklin attempted to outflank the Confederate positions and break through their lines. Franklin's troops encountered stiff resistance from Confederate forces under Jackson's command. The fighting was fierce, with both sides suffering significant losses. Despite some initial success, the Union forces were unable to achieve a decisive breakthrough, and the Confederate lines held. The aftermath of the Battle of Fredericksburg ended in a decisive Confederate victory. The Union Army had suffered over 12,000 casualties, compared to approximately 5,000 for the Confederates. The Union's failure to achieve its objectives was a significant blow to Northern morale and further complicated the Union's efforts to defeat the Confederacy. Burnside, devastated by the outcome of the battle, offered his resignation to Lincoln. However, Lincoln declined, believing that a change in leadership at that time would be detrimental to the Union cause. Burnside remained in command, but his reputation as a military leader was severely damaged. Key figures in the battle: Major General Ambrose Burnside. Burnside, the commander of the Union Army of the Potomac, was a controversial figure. A West Point graduate and veteran of the Mexican-American War, Burnside had previously served as a corps commander under McClellan. Despite his experience, Burnside was known for his indecisiveness and lack of confidence in his own abilities. Burnside's plan for the Battle of Fredericksburg was ambitious but flawed. His decision to launch a frontal assault against well-entrenched Confederate positions was widely criticized, and his failure to adapt to the changing circumstances of the battle contributed to the Union's defeat. General Robert E. Lee, the commander of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, was one of the most skilled and respected military leaders of the Civil War. A graduate of West Point and a veteran of the Mexican-American War, Lee had previously served as the superintendent of the United States Military Academy. Lee's leadership at Fredericksburg was exemplary. He effectively utilized the terrain and his army's defensive advantages to repel the Union assaults. His ability to inspire his troops and maintain their morale in the face of overwhelming odds was a key factor in the Confederate victory. Lieutenant General James Longstreet, one of Lee's most trusted subordinates, played a crucial role in the Confederate defense at Fredericksburg. Longstreet's corps was responsible for holding the Confederate positions at Marye Heights, and his troops played a key role in repelling the Union assaults. Longstreet's tactical acumen and ability to coordinate his forces effectively were instrumental in the Confederate victory. His leadership at Fredericksburg further solidified his reputation as one of the Confederacy's most capable generals. Lieutenant General Thomas Stonewall Jackson, another of Lee's key lieutenants, commanded the Confederate forces on the southern flank of the battlefield. Jackson's troops were responsible for repelling the Union attempts to outflank the Confederate positions. Jackson's aggressive and determined leadership was a key factor in the Confederate success on the southern flank. His ability to inspire his troops and his tactical brilliance were evident throughout the battle. The human cost of the battle: casualties and losses. The Battle of Fredericksburg was one of the bloodiest engagements of the Civil War. The Union Army suffered over 12,000 casualties, including killed, wounded, and missing. The Confederate forces, while victorious, also suffered significant losses, with approximately 5,000 casualties. The high casualty figures were a stark reminder of the brutal nature of the Civil War. The battle's toll on both sides was immense, with thousands of families mourning the loss of loved ones. The impact on civilians: the town of Fredericksburg, located at the center of the battlefield, bore the brunt of the fighting. The town's residents were caught in the crossfire, with many homes and buildings destroyed or damaged during the battle. The civilian population suffered greatly, with many forced to flee their homes and seek refuge elsewhere. The impact of the battle on Fredericksburg's civilians was long-lasting. The town's economy and infrastructure were severely disrupted, and it would take years for the community to recover from the devastation. The medical response: the high number of casualties at Fredericksburg placed a tremendous strain on the medical resources of both armies. Field hospitals were quickly overwhelmed, and medical personnel worked tirelessly to treat the wounded. The battle highlighted the need for improved medical care and logistics in the Civil War. The lessons learned at Fredericksburg would contribute to the development of more effective medical practices and the establishment of better field hospitals in subsequent battles. The strategic and tactical lessons of Fredericksburg, the importance of terrain and defensive positions. The Battle of Fredericksburg underscored the importance of terrain and defensive positions in military strategy. The Confederate forces, well entrenched and utilizing the natural advantages of the terrain, were able to repel the Union assaults with relative ease. The battle demonstrated the effectiveness of defensive warfare and the challenges of launching successful frontal assaults against well-prepared positions. These lessons would influence military tactics in future engagements, both during the Civil War and in later conflicts. The role of leadership and decision-making. The Battle of Fredericksburg highlighted the critical role of leadership and decision-making in military operations. Burnside's indecisiveness and poor strategic choices contributed to the Union's defeat, while Lee's effective leadership and tactical acumen were key factors in the Confederate victory. The battle served as a reminder of the importance of strong and decisive leadership in achieving success on the battlefield. It also underscored the need for commanders to adapt to changing circumstances and make informed decisions based on the realities of the situation. The impact of logistics and supply. The logistical challenges faced by the Union Army at Fredericksburg were a significant factor in the battle's outcome. Delays in the arrival of pontoon bridges and other supplies hampered the Union's ability to execute its plans effectively. The battle highlighted the importance of logistics and supply in military operations. It demonstrated that even the best-laid plans could be undermined by logistical failures, and that effective supply chains were essential for success in the field. The aftermath and legacy of Fredericksburg. The impact on Union and Confederate morale. The Union's defeat at Fredericksburg had a profound impact on Northern morale. The high casualty figures and the failure to achieve any significant gains were a blow to the Union's war effort. The battle further eroded public support for the war and increased pressure on Lincoln to find a way to achieve victory. In contrast, the Confederate victory at Fredericksburg boosted Southern morale and reinforced the belief that the Confederacy could achieve independence. The battle demonstrated the resilience and determination of the Confederate forces and their ability to defend their homeland against a larger and better equipped enemy. The political fallout. The Battle of Fredericksburg had significant political implications for both the Union and the Confederacy. In the North, the defeat led to increased criticism of Lincoln's leadership and his handling of the war. The battle also intensified the debate over the conduct of the war and the role of the Union Army. In the South, the victory at Fredericksburg strengthened the position of the Confederate government and bolstered support for the war effort. The battle demonstrated the effectiveness of the Confederate military and reinforced the belief that the South could achieve its goals through continued resistance. The long-term consequences. The Battle of Fredericksburg had long-term consequences for the Civil War and American history. The Union's failure to achieve a decisive victory prolonged the war and increased the overall cost in terms of lives and resources. The battle also highlighted the challenges of conducting a successful offensive campaign against a determined and well-prepared enemy. The lessons learned at Fredericksburg would influence future military operations and contribute to the development of new tactics and strategies. The battle's legacy would be felt for years to come, shaping the course of the Civil War and the eventual outcome of the conflict. The Battle of Fredericksburg in memory and commemoration. The preservation of the battlefield. The Fredericksburg battlefield has been preserved as a national military park, ensuring that the site of this significant engagement is protected for future generations. The park includes key locations such as Marye Heights, the sunken road, and the stone wall that played a crucial role in the battle. Visitors to the park can explore the battlefield and learn about the events that took place there through interpretive exhibits, guided tours, and educational programs. The preservation of the battlefield serves as a reminder of the sacrifices made by both Union and Confederate soldiers and the importance of remembering the lessons of the past. The role of memorials and monuments. Numerous memorials and monuments have been erected on the Fredericksburg battlefield to honor the soldiers who fought and died there. These memorials serve as a testament to the bravery and sacrifice of those who participated in the battle and provide a place for reflection and remembrance. The memorials also highlight the different perspectives and experiences of the Union and Confederate soldiers. They serve as a reminder of the complex and often conflicting narratives of the Civil War and the importance of understanding the full scope of its impact. The battle in popular culture. The Battle of Fredericksburg has been depicted in various forms of popular culture, including literature, film, and television. These portrayals have helped to keep the memory of the battle alive and have contributed to the public's understanding of its significance. However, the portrayal of the battle in popular culture has also been subject to criticism and debate. Some depictions have been accused of oversimplifying the complexities of the battle or presenting a biased view of the events. It is important to approach these portrayals with a critical eye and to seek out accurate and balanced accounts of the battle. The Battle of Fredericksburg and the evolution of warfare. The impact of technology and weaponry. The Battle of Fredericksburg highlighted the impact of new technologies and weaponry on the conduct of warfare. The use of rifled muskets and artillery had a significant effect on the battlefield, increasing the range and accuracy of fire and making traditional tactics less effective. The battle demonstrated the need for new approaches to warfare that took into account the realities of modern weaponry. It also underscored the importance of adapting to changing circumstances and developing new tactics and strategies to counter the advantages of the enemy. The role of engineering and logistics. The Battle of Fredericksburg also highlighted the importance of engineering and logistics in military operations. The Union's reliance on pontoon bridges to cross the Rappahannock River demonstrated the critical role of engineering in facilitating movement and supply. The battle also underscored the challenges of maintaining effective supply lines and the impact of logistical failures on the outcome of military operations. These lessons would influence the development of military engineering and logistics in future conflicts. The evolution of tactics and strategy. The Battle of Fredericksburg contributed to the evolution of military tactics and strategy during the Civil War. The failure of the Union's frontal assaults against well-entrenched positions demonstrated the limitations of traditional tactics and the need for more innovative approaches. The battle also highlighted the importance of coordination and communication in military operations. The Union's inability to effectively coordinate its attacks and adapt to the changing circumstances of the battle contributed to its defeat. The Battle of Fredericksburg and the American Civil War. The battle's place in the Civil War. The Battle of Fredericksburg was a significant engagement in the American Civil War, but it was just one of many battles that shaped the course of the conflict. The battle's outcome had a profound impact on the war's trajectory, influencing the strategies and decisions of both the Union and the Confederacy. The battle also highlighted the challenges and complexities of the Civil War, demonstrating the difficulty of achieving a decisive victory and the high cost of prolonged conflict. It served as a reminder of the human cost of war and the importance of finding a resolution to the conflict. The battle's impact on the Union and Confederate strategies. The Union's defeat at Fredericksburg forced a re-evaluation of its strategy and approach to the war. The failure to achieve a decisive victory led to increased pressure on Lincoln and his generals to develop new plans and tactics to defeat the Confederacy. In the South, the victory at Fredericksburg reinforced the belief that the Confederacy could achieve its goals through continued resistance. The battle demonstrated the effectiveness of the Confederate military and bolstered support for the war effort. The battle's role in shaping the outcome of the Civil War. While the Battle of Fredericksburg was a significant engagement, it was not the decisive turning point of the Civil War. The war would continue for another 2.5 years, with many more battles and campaigns before the Union ultimately achieved victory. However, the battle's impact on the war's trajectory and the lessons learned from it would influence the course of the conflict. The Union's failure at Fredericksburg served as a catalyst for change, leading to new strategies and approaches that would eventually contribute to the Union's ultimate victory. The Battle of Fredericksburg was a pivotal moment in the American Civil War, showcasing the brutal realities of conflict and the high cost of war. The battle's outcome had a profound impact on the war's trajectory, influencing the strategies and decisions of both the Union and the Confederacy. The lessons learned at Fredericksburg would shape the course of the Civil War and contribute to the evolution of military tactics and strategy. The battle's legacy serves as a reminder of the sacrifices made by those who fought and died on its fields and the importance of remembering the lessons of the past. As we reflect on the Battle of Fredericksburg, we are reminded of the complexities and challenges of war and the importance of striving for peace and understanding. The battle's impact on American history and its enduring legacy continue to resonate, serving as a testament to the resilience and determination of those who fought in one of the nation's most defining conflicts. The Battle of Fredericksburg, a comprehensive analysis of tactics employed by both sides. The Battle of Fredericksburg, fought from December 11 to December 15, 1862, during the American Civil War, stands as one of the most significant and bloody engagements of the conflict. It pitted the Union Army of the Potomac, commanded by Major General Ambrose Burnside, against the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, led by General Robert E. Lee. The battle took place in and around Fredericksburg, Virginia, and is remembered for its brutal frontal assaults, formidable defensive positions, and the high casualties suffered by the Union forces. This article delves into the main tactics used by both sides during the Battle of Fredericksburg, examining the strategic decisions, battlefield maneuvers, and the outcomes that resulted from these tactics. The Union's strategic objectives. By late 1862, the Union was under increasing pressure to achieve a decisive victory in the Eastern theater of the Civil War. President Abraham Lincoln and his military advisors sought to capitalize on the Union's numerical and material superiority to deliver a crushing blow to the Confederacy. The capture of Richmond, the Confederate capital, was a primary objective, as it was believed that its fall would significantly weaken the Confederate war effort. Major General Ambrose Burnside, who had recently taken command of the Army of the Potomac, devised a plan to move his forces rapidly towards Fredericksburg, cross the Rappahannock River, and advance on Richmond. Burnside's strategy relied on speed and surprise, aiming to outmaneuver General Lee's Army of Northern Virginia and force a decisive engagement. The Confederate defensive strategy General Robert E. Lee, aware of the Union's intentions, sought to defend key strategic points in Virginia while maintaining the flexibility to respond to Union movements. Lee's strategy was rooted in the principles of defensive warfare, leveraging the terrain and fortifications to offset the Union's numerical advantage. He aimed to inflict heavy casualties on the Union forces while conserving his own army's strength. Fredericksburg, located on the Rappahannock River, was a critical point in Lee's defensive line. The town provided a natural defensive position, with high ground to the west and south that could be fortified to repel Union attacks. Lee's plan was to hold Fredericksburg, forcing the Union to attack well-entrenched positions, thereby maximizing Confederate defensive advantages. The Union's tactical approach, initial movements, and the crossing of the Rappahannock River. Burnside's plan hinged on the rapid movement of his army to Fredericksburg and the swift crossing of the Rappahannock River. The Union Army began its march on November 15, 1862. With the goal of reaching Fredericksburg before Lee could concentrate his forces. However, delays in the arrival of pontoon bridges necessary for crossing the river significantly hampered Burnside's timetable. The Union engineers eventually constructed pontoon bridges under Confederate fire, allowing the Union forces to cross the river and enter Fredericksburg on December 11. The crossing was marked by intense skirmishing and urban combat, as Confederate sharpshooters harassed the Union troops from buildings within the town. The assault on Marye Heights. Once across the river, Burnside planned a two-pronged assault on the Confederate positions. The main thrust was directed against Marye Heights, a prominent ridge to the west of Fredericksburg, where Lee had established strong defensive works. The secondary attack was aimed at Prospect Hill, to the south of the town, where Confederate forces were also entrenched. The assault on Marye Heights began on December 13. Burnside ordered a series of frontal attacks against the Confederate positions, which were defended by General James Longstreet's corps. The Confederate defenders were well protected by a stone wall at the base of the heights, with artillery positioned on the ridge above. Union troops advanced across open ground, subjected to devastating artillery and rifle fire. Despite repeated attempts, the Union forces were unable to breach the Confederate defenses. The attacks resulted in catastrophic casualties, with Union soldiers falling in waves as they charged up the slopes of Marye Heights. The attack on Prospect Hill. Simultaneously, the Union forces launched an assault on Prospect Hill, to the south of Fredericksburg. This attack was led by Major General William B. Franklin's Left Grand Division. Franklin's forces initially achieved some success, penetrating the Confederate lines and threatening to outflank Lee's army. However, Confederate reinforcements, including General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson's corps, quickly counterattacked, driving the Union forces back. The fighting on Prospect Hill was intense, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Despite initial gains, the Union assault ultimately failed to achieve a breakthrough. The role of artillery and engineering. Artillery played a crucial role in the Union's tactical approach at Fredericksburg. Union artillery batteries were positioned to provide covering fire for the infantry assaults, targeting Confederate positions on Marye Heights and Prospect Hill. However, the effectiveness of Union artillery was limited by the terrain and the strength of Confederate fortifications. Union engineers were also instrumental in constructing the pontoon bridges that allowed the Army to cross the Rappahannock River. Despite facing heavy fire from Confederate sharpshooters, the engineers successfully completed the bridges, enabling the Union forces to advance into Fredericksburg. The Confederates' tactical approach, defensive preparations and fortifications. The Confederate defense at Fredericksburg was characterized by meticulous preparation and the effective use of terrain. General Lee recognized the strategic importance of the high ground west and south of Fredericksburg and ordered the construction of extensive fortifications. Marye Heights, in particular, was heavily fortified. A stone wall at the base of the heights provided cover for Confederate infantry, while artillery batteries were positioned on the ridge above. The combination of natural terrain and man-made fortifications created a formidable defensive position that would prove nearly impregnable. The use of artillery and enfilade fire. Confederate artillery played a decisive role in repelling the Union assaults. The artillery batteries on Marye Heights and Prospect Hill were positioned to deliver enfilade fire, raking the advancing Union troops with devastating effect. The Confederate gunners demonstrated remarkable accuracy and discipline, inflicting heavy casualties on the Union forces. The stone wall at the base of Marye Heights also served as a key defensive feature. Confederate infantry, sheltered behind the wall, delivered sustained rifle fire into the advancing Union ranks. The combination of artillery and infantry fire created a killing zone that proved insurmountable for the Union attackers. Counterattacks and reinforcement. The Confederate defense was not purely passive. General Lee and his subordinates, particularly General Longstreet and General Jackson, were adept at launching timely counterattacks to repel Union advances. At Prospect Hill, Jackson's corps executed a well-coordinated counterattack that halted the Union breakthrough and restored the Confederate line. Lee's ability to reinforce threatened sectors of the battlefield was a key factor in the Confederate success. The rapid movement of Confederate reserves to critical points, such as Prospect Hill, demonstrated the flexibility and responsiveness of Lee's command structure. The role of sharpshooters and urban combat. In the initial stages of the battle, Confederate sharpshooters played a significant role in delaying the Union crossing of the Rappahannock River. Positioned in buildings within Fredericksburg, the sharpshooters harassed Union engineers and troops, slowing the construction of pontoon bridges and inflicting casualties. The urban combat in Fredericksburg was intense, with both sides engaging in close quarters fighting. The Confederate sharpshooters, utilizing the cover of buildings and narrow streets, were able to hold off the Union advance for a time, buying precious hours for Lee to reinforce his positions on the high ground. Analysis of tactical outcomes. Union tactical failures. The Union's tactical approach at Fredericksburg was marked by several critical failures. Burnside's plan relied on speed and surprise, but delays in the arrival of pontoon bridges and the subsequent crossing of the Rappahannock River allowed Lee to concentrate his forces and fortify his positions. The decision to launch repeated frontal assaults against heavily fortified positions, particularly at Marye Heights, was a significant tactical error. The Union forces suffered catastrophic casualties as a result, with little to show for their efforts. The failure to adequately reconnoiter the Confederate defenses and adapt the plan accordingly further compounded the Union's difficulties. The assault on Prospect Hill, while initially promising, ultimately failed due to a lack of coordination and the timely intervention of Confederate reinforcements. The Union's inability to exploit their initial gains and maintain momentum was a critical factor in the overall failure of the offensive. Confederate tactical successes. The Confederate defense at Fredericksburg was a masterclass in the effective use of terrain, fortifications, and combined arms tactics. Lee's decision to fortify the high ground west and south of Fredericksburg proved decisive, as the Union forces were unable to overcome the formidable defensive positions. The coordination between Confederate infantry and artillery was exemplary, with enfilade fire and sustained rifle fire creating a deadly barrier for the Union attackers. The ability of Confederate commanders, particularly Longstreet and Jackson, to launch timely counterattacks and reinforce threatened sectors of the battlefield was a key factor in repelling the Union assaults. The use of sharpshooters and urban combat tactics in the initial stages of the battle also played a significant role in delaying the Union advance and buying time for the Confederate defenses to be fully prepared. The Battle of Fredericksburg stands as a stark reminder of the importance of terrain, preparation, and tactical flexibility in military operations. The Union's reliance on frontal assaults against well-entrenched positions, combined with delays and logistical challenges, led to a costly and ultimately unsuccessful offensive. In contrast, the Confederate defense, characterized by meticulous preparation, effective use of artillery, and timely counterattacks, demonstrated the advantages of defensive warfare and the importance of leveraging terrain to maximize defensive strengths. The tactics employed by both sides at Fredericksburg had profound implications for the conduct of the Civil War. The Union's failure to achieve a decisive victory at Fredericksburg underscored the challenges of overcoming well-prepared defensive positions and highlighted the need for more sophisticated tactical approaches in future operations. For the Confederacy, the successful defense of Fredericksburg bolstered morale and reinforced the effectiveness of Lee's defensive strategy, setting the stage for further Confederate successes in the Eastern Theater. In the annals of military history, the Battle of Fredericksburg serves as a poignant example of the complexities and brutal realities of warfare. The lessons learned from the tactics employed by both sides continue to resonate, offering valuable insights into the art and science of military strategy and the enduring impact of tactical decisions on the outcome of battles and the course of history. The impact of the lack of pontoon bridges on the outcome of the Battle of Fredericksburg. The Battle of Fredericksburg, fought from December 11 to December 15, 1862, during the American Civil War, stands as one of the most lopsided Confederate victories. The Union Army of the Potomac, commanded by Major General Ambrose Burnside, suffered devastating losses in its attempts to dislodge General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia from its entrenched positions on the heights behind Fredericksburg, Virginia. While many factors contributed to the Union's defeat, one of the most critical was the lack of pontoon bridges, which delayed the Union Army's crossing of the Rappahannock River and allowed the Confederates ample time to prepare their defenses. This article explores how the absence of pontoon bridges impacted the outcome of the Battle of Fredericksburg, examining the logistical failures, strategic consequences, and broader implications for the Union war effort. Background: the strategic importance of Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg, Virginia, was a strategically significant location during the Civil War. Situated midway between Washington, D.C., and Richmond, the Confederate capital, it was a key transportation hub. The Rappahannock River, which flowed past the town, served as a natural defensive barrier. Control of Fredericksburg would allow the Union Army to advance toward Richmond, while for the Confederates, holding the town was crucial to protecting their capital and maintaining their defensive lines. In November 1862, Major General Ambrose Burnside assumed command of the Army of the Potomac after President Abraham Lincoln grew frustrated with the cautiousness of his predecessor, Major General George B. McClellan. Burnside devised a plan to move the army swiftly to Fredericksburg, cross the Rappahannock River, and advance on Richmond before Lee could react. However, the success of this plan hinged on the timely arrival of pontoon bridges, which were essential for crossing the river. The pontoon bridge delay, a logistical failure. The plan and its requirements. Burnside's plan required the rapid construction of pontoon bridges across the Rappahannock River at Fredericksburg. Pontoon bridges, made of floating platforms supported by boats or barges, were the most efficient way to move large numbers of troops, artillery, and supplies across a wide river. The Union Army had used pontoon bridges successfully in previous campaigns, and Burnside assumed they would be available when needed. The responsibility for delivering the pontoon bridges fell to the Union's Engineering Corps and the Quartermaster Department. However, a series of logistical failures and miscommunications delayed the arrival of the pontoons, with devastating consequences for Burnside's campaign. The delay and its causes. The pontoon bridges were supposed to arrive in Fredericksburg by late November, but they did not reach the town until December. Several factors contributed to this delay. 1. Poor communication. There was a lack of clear communication between Burnside's headquarters and the Quartermaster Department responsible for transporting the pontoons. Burnside assumed the pontoons were en route, while the Quartermaster Department was unaware of the urgency. 2. Transportation issues. The pontoons were heavy and cumbersome, requiring specialized wagons and teams of horses to transport them. The roads were in poor condition due to winter weather, further slowing their progress. 3. Confederate interference. Confederate cavalry under General J.E.B. Stuart conducted raids on Union supply lines, disrupting the movement of the pontoons and other supplies. 4. Bureaucratic inefficiency. The Union Army's logistical system was plagued by inefficiency and red tape, which delayed the procurement and delivery of critical materials. The consequences of the delay in the arrival of the pontoon bridges had several immediate and far-reaching consequences. 1. Loss of strategic initiative. Burnside's plan relied on speed and surprise. By the time the pontoons arrived, Lee had already concentrated his forces on the high ground behind Fredericksburg, making a Union assault much more difficult. 2. Extended Confederate preparation time. The delay gave Lee and his engineers ample time to fortify their positions. They constructed earthworks, trenches, and artillery emplacements on Marye Heights and Prospect Hill, which would prove nearly impregnable during the battle. 3. Union morale and readiness. The delay demoralized Union troops, who were forced to wait in cold and wet conditions without adequate shelter or supplies. This lowered their readiness and fighting spirit. 4. Public and political backlash. The delay and subsequent defeat at Fredericksburg led to widespread criticism of Burnside and the Union war effort. It undermined public confidence in the Union's ability to win the war and increased pressure on President Lincoln to make changes in military leadership. The Battle of Fredericksburg, a costly Union defeat. The crossing of the Rappahannock. When the pontoon bridges finally arrived on December 11, Union engineers began constructing them under heavy Confederate fire. The crossing was slow and costly, with Union troops suffering significant casualties as they attempted to secure a foothold on the opposite bank. The delay in the arrival of the pontoons had allowed Confederate sharpshooters to take up positions in Fredericksburg, turning the town into a deadly killing zone. The assault on Marye Heights. On December 13, Burnside ordered a series of frontal assaults against the Confederate positions on Marye Heights. The Union troops advanced across open ground, exposed to devastating artillery and rifle fire from the entrenched Confederates. The lack of pontoon bridges had forced Burnside to abandon his original plan of a flanking maneuver, leaving him with no alternative but a direct assault. The results were catastrophic. Union forces suffered over 12,000 casualties, compared to fewer than 5,000 for the Confederates. The Union Army was forced to retreat across the Rappahannock, marking a decisive Confederate victory. Broader implications of the pontoon bridge failure impact on Union strategy. The failure at Fredericksburg highlighted the importance of logistics in military operations. The Union's inability to deliver the pontoon bridges on time exposed weaknesses in its supply chain and command structure. This led to reforms in the Union Army's logistical system, including the creation of a more centralized and efficient quartermaster department. Impact on leadership and morale. The defeat at Fredericksburg led to a crisis of confidence in Union leadership. Burnside was relieved of command in January 1863 and replaced by Major General Joseph Hooker. The battle also deepened the divide between the Union Army and the civilian population, as the public grew increasingly disillusioned with the war effort. Impact on the Confederate war effort. For the Confederates, the victory at Fredericksburg was a morale booster and a validation of Lee's defensive strategy. However, it also reinforced a sense of overconfidence that would contribute to later defeats, such as the Battle of Gettysburg. The lack of pontoon bridges was a critical factor in the Union's defeat at the Battle of Fredericksburg. The delay in their arrival undermined Burnside's plan, allowed the Confederates to prepare their defenses, and forced the Union Army into a costly and futile frontal assault. The battle serves as a stark reminder of the importance of logistics and preparation in military operations, and highlights the consequences of failure in these areas. The lessons learned from Fredericksburg would shape the Union's approach to future campaigns, ultimately contributing to its eventual victory in the Civil War. By late 1862, the American Civil War had reached a critical juncture. The Union had suffered a series of setbacks, including the failure of General George McClellan's Peninsula Campaign and the Confederate victory at the Second Battle of Bull Run. President Abraham Lincoln, desperate for a decisive victory, appointed General Ambrose Burnside to command the Army of the Potomac in November 1862. Burnside, though reluctant to accept the position, was tasked with advancing on the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia, and delivering a blow to Lee's army. The Battle of Fredericksburg was a direct result of Burnside's ambitious plan to achieve this objective. However, his strategic decisions before the battle, ranging from his choice of crossing points to his handling of logistics and communication, played a pivotal role in the Union's devastating defeat. The decision to replace McClellan and accept command, one of Burnside's first and most consequential decisions, was accepting command of the Army of the Potomac. After McClellan's failure to pursue Lee's army following the Battle of Antietam in September 1862, Lincoln grew frustrated with McClellan's cautious approach. Burnside, who had previously commanded the Union's successful operations in North Carolina, was seen as a more aggressive and decisive leader. However, Burnside was hesitant to accept the role, believing he was not qualified for such a large command. His decision to take command, despite his reservations, set the stage for the challenges he would face at Fredericksburg. Burnside's lack of confidence in his own abilities may have contributed to his later indecisiveness and reliance on flawed plans. The choice of Fredericksburg as the target. Burnside's strategic plan involved moving the Army of the Potomac rapidly toward Fredericksburg, a key town on the Rappahannock River. From there, he intended to advance on Richmond. This decision was influenced by several factors. Proximity to Richmond. Fredericksburg was approximately halfway between Washington, D.C., and Richmond, making it a logical staging point for an offensive. Transportation routes. The town was a major transportation hub, with roads and railroads leading directly to Richmond. Surprise element. Burnside hoped to outmaneuver Lee by moving quickly and crossing the Rappahannock River before the Confederates could react. However, this decision was fraught with risks. Fredericksburg was heavily defended by Confederate forces, and the terrain surrounding the town, particularly the high ground known as Marye Heights, posed significant challenges for an attacking army. The delay in crossing the Rappahannock River. One of Burnside's most critical mistakes was the delay in crossing the Rappahannock River. His original plan called for a rapid movement to Fredericksburg, followed by an immediate crossing of the river. However, logistical failures and poor communication undermined this strategy. Pontoon bridge delays. Burnside's plan relied on the timely arrival of pontoon bridges to facilitate the crossing. However, due to bureaucratic inefficiencies and miscommunication, the pontoons did not arrive until weeks after the Army of the Potomac reached Fredericksburg. This delay gave Lee ample time to reinforce his positions and prepare for the Union assault. Missed opportunities. During the delay, the river was low enough to ford in some places, but Burnside chose to wait for the pontoons rather than risk a crossing without them. This decision allowed Lee to concentrate his forces and fortify the high ground. The decision to attack Marye Heights. Perhaps the most infamous of Burnside's decisions was his insistence on launching frontal assaults against Marye Heights, a heavily fortified Confederate position. Despite warnings from his subordinates about the futility of such attacks, Burnside ordered repeated charges against the Confederate lines. Underestimation of Confederate defenses. Burnside underestimated the strength of Lee's defenses, particularly the stone wall at the base of Marye Heights, behind which Confederate troops were entrenched. Lack of flexibility. Burnside's plan lacked flexibility and failed to account for alternative strategies, such as flanking maneuvers or diversionary attacks. His rigid adherence to the frontal assault plan resulted in catastrophic casualties for the Union Army. Failure to coordinate with other Union forces. Burnside's plan for the Fredericksburg campaign also suffered from a lack of coordination with other Union forces in the region. For example, he failed to effectively communicate with General William Franklin, who commanded the left wing of the Army of the Potomac. Franklin's failure to press his attack on the Confederate right flank contributed to the overall failure of the Union offensive. Overconfidence and ignoring intelligence reports. Burnside's decision-making was further hampered by his overconfidence and disregard for intelligence reports. Despite receiving warnings about the strength of Lee's defenses and the challenges posed by the terrain, Burnside pressed ahead with his plan. This overconfidence, coupled with his inexperience in commanding large armies, led to a series of tactical blunders. The aftermath of Burnside's decisions. The Battle of Fredericksburg ended in a resounding Confederate victory, with the Union Army suffering over 12,000 casualties compared to the Confederates' 5,000. Burnside's strategic decisions, ranging from his choice of Fredericksburg as the target to his insistence on frontal assaults, were widely criticized and led to calls for his removal. While Burnside's intentions were commendable, his lack of strategic foresight, poor logistical planning, and failure to adapt to changing circumstances ultimately doomed the Union Army to defeat. The battle serves as a stark reminder of the importance of sound decision-making and flexibility in military leadership. This overview provides a detailed analysis of Burnside's key strategic decisions before the Battle of Fredericksburg. If you would like to explore specific aspects of the battle or Burnside's leadership in greater depth, feel free to ask. The Battle of Fredericksburg and its impact on Northern public opinion. The American Civil War, a defining moment in United States history, was marked by a series of pivotal battles that shaped the course of the conflict and influenced public opinion on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line. Among these, the Battle of Fredericksburg, fought from December 11 to December 15, 1862, stands out as a significant event that had profound implications for the Union's war effort and the morale of the Northern populace. This article delves into the intricacies of the Battle of Fredericksburg, examining its strategic importance, the human cost, and its lasting impact on public opinion in the North. The strategic context of the Battle of Fredericksburg. The Civil War in late 1862. By late 1862, the American Civil War had been raging for over a year and a half. The Union, despite its superior resources and manpower, had struggled to achieve decisive victories against the Confederacy. The early stages of the war had seen a series of Union defeats, including the First Battle of Bull Run and the Peninsula Campaign, which had emboldened the Confederacy and dampened Northern morale. However, the tide seemed to be turning in favor of the Union by the fall of 1862. The Union victory at the Battle of Antietam in September 1862, though tactically inconclusive, had provided President Abraham Lincoln with the opportunity to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared the freedom of all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory. This move not only redefined the purpose of the war but also galvanized abolitionist sentiment in the North. The strategic importance of Fredericksburg, Virginia, located midway between Washington, D.C., and Richmond, the Confederate capital, held significant strategic importance. Control of Fredericksburg would provide the Union with a crucial foothold in central Virginia, enabling further advances toward Richmond. Additionally, the town was a key transportation hub, with roads and railroads connecting it to other important locations in the region. For the Confederacy, holding Fredericksburg was essential to protecting Richmond and maintaining their defensive lines. The town's proximity to the Rappahannock River made it a natural defensive position, and the Confederate Army, under the command of General Robert E. Lee, was determined to hold the line. The Union's plan, the Fredericksburg Campaign. In November 1862, President Lincoln appointed Major General Ambrose Burnside as the new commander of the Army of the Potomac, replacing Major General George B. McClellan. Burnside, eager to prove his worth, devised a plan to seize Fredericksburg and then march on Richmond. Burnside's plan involved a rapid movement of his army to Fredericksburg, crossing the Rappahannock River, and securing the town before Lee could reinforce it. However, delays in the arrival of pontoon bridges needed for the river crossing allowed Lee to consolidate his forces and prepare a strong defensive position on the high ground west of Fredericksburg, known as Marye Heights. The Battle of Fredericksburg. The prelude to the Battle of Fredericksburg began on December 11, 1862. When Union engineers attempted to construct pontoon bridges across the Rappahannock River under heavy Confederate fire. Despite the fierce resistance, the Union forces managed to complete the bridges and began crossing the river on December 12. As the Union troops entered Fredericksburg, they encountered a town that had been largely abandoned by its civilian population. The Union soldiers, frustrated by the delays and the Confederate resistance, looted and vandalized the town, further inflaming tensions between the two sides. The assault on Marye Heights. The main phase of the battle began on December 13, 1862, when Burnside ordered a series of frontal assaults against the Confederate positions on Marye Heights. The Confederate forces, entrenched behind a stone wall at the base of the heights, had a clear field of fire and were able to repel wave after wave of Union attacks. The Union soldiers, despite their bravery and determination, were cut down in droves as they advanced across open ground toward the Confederate positions. The Confederate artillery, positioned on the heights, rained down deadly fire on the advancing Union troops, causing catastrophic casualties. The aftermath of the battle. By the end of the day on December 13, the Union forces had suffered over 12,000 casualties, compared to around 5,000 for the Confederates. The Union Army, demoralized and bloodied, withdrew across the Rappahannock River on December 15. Bringing the Battle of Fredericksburg to a close. The battle was a resounding Confederate victory and a devastating defeat for the Union. The Union Army's failure to achieve its objectives at Fredericksburg was a severe blow to Northern morale and raised serious questions about the competence of Union leadership. The impact of the battle on Northern public opinion. Initial reactions to the battle. The news of the Union defeat at Fredericksburg reached the Northern public in mid-December 1862, and the reaction was one of shock and dismay. The scale of the Union casualties, coupled with the apparent futility of the assaults on Marye Heights, led to widespread anger and frustration. Newspapers in the North, which had previously been supportive of the war effort, began to criticize the Union leadership, particularly General Burnside. Editorial cartoons and articles lambasted Burnside for his poor decision-making and questioned his ability to lead the Army of the Potomac. The political fallout. The defeat at Fredericksburg had significant political repercussions in the North. President Lincoln, already under pressure from both radical Republicans and war Democrats, faced increased criticism for his handling of the war. The radical Republicans, who had been pushing for a more aggressive prosecution of the war and the abolition of slavery, saw the defeat as evidence of the administration's incompetence. In Congress, the defeat at Fredericksburg led to calls for investigations into the conduct of the war and the performance of Union generals. The Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War, a congressional committee established to oversee the war effort launched an inquiry into the Battle of Fredericksburg, further undermining confidence in the Union leadership. The impact on Northern morale. The defeat at Fredericksburg had a profound impact on Northern morale. The Union Army's inability to achieve a decisive victory, despite its superior resources, led to growing disillusionment among the Northern populace. Many began to question whether the war could be won and whether the sacrifices being made were worth it. The high casualty figures from Fredericksburg also had a demoralizing effect. The sight of thousands of wounded and dead soldiers returning from the front lines was a stark reminder of the human cost of the war. Families who had lost loved ones in the battle were particularly vocal in their criticism of the war effort. The role of the media. The media played a crucial role in shaping public opinion in the aftermath of the Battle of Fredericksburg. Newspapers, which were the primary source of information for most Americans, provided detailed accounts of the battle and its aftermath. The graphic descriptions of the carnage and the suffering of the soldiers helped to galvanize anti-war sentiment in the North. Photography, a relatively new medium at the time, also played a significant role in shaping public perception of the battle. Photographs of the battlefield, showing the dead and wounded, were widely circulated and had a powerful impact on the Northern public. These images brought the horrors of war into the homes of ordinary Americans, further eroding support for the conflict. The impact on recruitment and desertion. The defeat at Fredericksburg also had a direct impact on Union recruitment efforts. The high casualty figures and the perception that the war was being mismanaged led to a decline in enlistments. Many potential recruits were deterred by the prospect of being sent to fight in a war that seemed increasingly futile. Desertion rates in the Union Army also increased in the aftermath of the battle. Soldiers who had witnessed the carnage at Fredericksburg were often reluctant to return to the front lines, and many chose to desert rather than face the prospect of further fighting. The impact on the abolitionist movement. The Battle of Fredericksburg also had implications for the abolitionist movement in the North. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued just a few months before the battle, had redefined the purpose of the war as not only preserving the Union but also ending slavery. However, the defeat at Fredericksburg led some to question whether the Union had the strength and will to achieve these goals. Abolitionists, who had been among the most vocal supporters of the war, were particularly disheartened by the defeat. They feared that the Union's inability to achieve a decisive victory would undermine the cause of emancipation and lead to a negotiated settlement that would leave slavery intact. The impact on international opinion. The Battle of Fredericksburg also had implications for international opinion, particularly in Europe. The Union's defeat at Fredericksburg was widely reported in the European press, and it led to increased skepticism about the Union's ability to win the war. This was particularly significant in Britain and France, where there was already considerable sympathy for the Confederacy. The British government, which had been considering recognizing the Confederacy as a belligerent power, was particularly influenced by the Union's defeat at Fredericksburg. The battle reinforced the perception that the Union was unlikely to achieve a decisive victory, and it led to increased pressure on the British government to intervene in the conflict. The long-term impact of the Battle of Fredericksburg. The fall of General Burnside. The defeat at Fredericksburg marked the beginning of the end for General Ambrose Burnside's tenure as commander of the Army of the Potomac. Burnside, who had been appointed to the position just a few months earlier, was widely blamed for the Union's failure at Fredericksburg. His decision to launch repeated frontal assaults against the entrenched Confederate positions was seen as a costly and unnecessary mistake. In the aftermath of the battle, Burnside offered his resignation to President Lincoln, but Lincoln initially refused to accept it. However, Burnside's position became increasingly untenable, and he was eventually relieved of command in January 1863. His replacement, Major General Joseph Hooker, would face the daunting task of rebuilding the morale and effectiveness of the Army of the Potomac. The impact on Union strategy. The defeat at Fredericksburg forced a re-evaluation of Union strategy. The failure of Burnside's frontal assaults demonstrated the futility of direct attacks against well-entrenched positions, and it led to a shift in Union tactics. Future Union commanders would place greater emphasis on maneuver and flanking movements, rather than direct assaults. The battle also highlighted the importance of logistics and planning in military operations. The delays in the arrival of pontoon bridges, which had allowed Lee to reinforce his positions, were seen as a critical failure in the Union's planning. Future Union campaigns would place greater emphasis on ensuring that all necessary resources were in place before launching an offensive. The impact on Confederate morale. While the Battle of Fredericksburg was a significant victory for the Confederacy, it also had important implications for Confederate morale. The successful defense of Fredericksburg bolstered Confederate confidence in their ability to withstand Union attacks, and it reinforced the perception that the Confederacy could achieve independence through military means. However, the battle also highlighted the limitations of Confederate resources. The Confederate Army, despite its victory, was stretched thin and faced significant challenges in terms of manpower and supplies. The victory at Fredericksburg was a tactical success, but it did not address the underlying strategic challenges facing the Confederacy. The impact on the home front. The Battle of Fredericksburg had a profound impact on the home front in both the North and the South. In the North, the defeat led to increased war weariness and a growing sense of disillusionment with the war effort. The high casualty figures and the perception that the war was being mismanaged led to increased calls for a negotiated settlement. In the South, the victory at Fredericksburg was celebrated as a triumph of Confederate arms, but it also had a sobering effect. The scale of the Union's losses was a reminder of the North's vast resources and its determination to win the war. The victory at Fredericksburg was a cause for celebration, but it also underscored the challenges that lay ahead for the Confederacy. The legacy of the Battle of Fredericksburg. The Battle of Fredericksburg left a lasting legacy on the American Civil War and on the nation as a whole. The battle demonstrated the brutal realities of modern warfare and the high human cost of the conflict. It also highlighted the importance of leadership, strategy, and logistics in military operations. The battle's impact on public opinion in the North was profound. The defeat at Fredericksburg led to a crisis of confidence in the Union's ability to win the war, and it forced a re-evaluation of Union strategy and leadership. The battle also had important implications for the abolitionist movement and for international opinion, particularly in Europe. In the long term, the Battle of Fredericksburg served as a reminder of the sacrifices made by both sides in the Civil War and the importance of perseverance in the face of adversity. The battle's legacy continues to be felt today, As Americans reflect on the cost of preserving the Union and the struggle for freedom and equality, the Battle of Fredericksburg was a pivotal moment in the American Civil War, with far-reaching implications for both the Union and the Confederacy. The Union's defeat at Fredericksburg had a profound impact on public opinion in the North, leading to a crisis of confidence in the war effort and a re-evaluation of Union strategy and leadership. The battle's legacy serves as a reminder of the human cost of war and the importance of leadership, strategy, and perseverance in the face of adversity. As we reflect on the Battle of Fredericksburg and its impact on the Civil War, we are reminded of the sacrifices made by those who fought and died in the struggle to preserve the Union and to achieve freedom and equality for all. The long-term effects of the Battle of Fredericksburg on the Civil War. The Battle of Fredericksburg, fought from December 11 to December 15, 1862, was one of the most significant and devastating engagements of the American Civil War. It pitted the Union Army of the Potomac, commanded by Major General Ambrose Burnside, against the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, led by General Robert E. Lee. The battle took place in and around Fredericksburg, Virginia, and resulted in a decisive Confederate victory. The Union Army suffered staggering casualties, with over 12,000 men killed, wounded, or missing, compared to the Confederates' 5,000. The battle's immediate outcome was a severe blow to Union morale and a boost to Confederate confidence. However, the long-term effects of the Battle of Fredericksburg extended far beyond the battlefield, influencing the course of the Civil War and the eventual outcome of the conflict. This article will explore the long-term effects of the Battle of Fredericksburg on the Civil War, examining its impact on military strategy, political developments, morale, and the broader trajectory of the war. By analyzing these aspects, we can gain a deeper understanding of how this pivotal battle shaped the Civil War and its aftermath, military strategy and leadership. Union leadership and the fall of Burnside. One of the most immediate and significant long-term effects of the Battle of Fredericksburg was its impact on Union leadership. The disastrous outcome of the battle led to a crisis of confidence in Major General Ambrose Burnside's ability to command the Army of the Potomac. Burnside's plan to cross the Rappahannock River and attack Lee's entrenched forces at Fredericksburg was bold but ultimately flawed. The Union Army's repeated assaults on Marye Heights, a strongly fortified Confederate position, resulted in catastrophic losses. In the aftermath of the battle, Burnside faced intense criticism from both his subordinates and the Northern public. His inability to achieve a decisive victory and the high casualty rate undermined his authority and led to calls for his removal. In January 1863, Burnside was relieved of command, and Major General Joseph Hooker was appointed as his successor. This change in leadership marked a turning point in the Union's military strategy, as Hooker sought to reorganize and revitalize the Army of the Potomac. The fall of Burnside and the subsequent leadership changes had long-term implications for the Union war effort. It highlighted the challenges of finding a competent and effective commander for the Army of the Potomac, a problem that would persist throughout the war. The frequent changes in leadership also disrupted the continuity of Union strategy and contributed to the Army's struggles in the Eastern Theater. Confederate confidence and Lee's reputation. On the Confederate side, the Battle of Fredericksburg bolstered the reputation of General Robert E. Lee and reinforced the confidence of the Army of Northern Virginia. Lee's successful defense of Fredericksburg demonstrated his tactical brilliance and ability to outmaneuver a larger Union force. The victory at Fredericksburg solidified Lee's status as one of the most formidable military leaders of the Civil War and enhanced the morale of his troops. The confidence gained from the victory at Fredericksburg had long-term effects on Confederate strategy. Lee's success encouraged him to adopt a more aggressive approach in subsequent campaigns, including the invasion of the North that culminated in the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863. The belief in the invincibility of Lee and his army, reinforced by the victory at Fredericksburg, influenced Confederate decision-making and contributed to the boldness of their military operations. However, the overconfidence that stemmed from the victory at Fredericksburg also had its drawbacks. It led to a sense of complacency among some Confederate leaders and troops, who began to underestimate the resilience and determination of the Union Army. This overconfidence would later prove costly in battles such as Gettysburg, where the Confederates suffered a devastating defeat. Impact on Union strategy and the Eastern Theater. The Battle of Fredericksburg had a profound impact on Union strategy in the Eastern Theater. The failure of Burnside's campaign highlighted the challenges of conducting offensive operations against well-entrenched Confederate forces. The Union Army's inability to achieve a decisive victory at Fredericksburg forced a re-evaluation of its approach to the war in the East. In the months following the battle, Union commanders began to place greater emphasis on coordination and combined arms operations. The lessons learned from Fredericksburg influenced the development of new tactics and strategies aimed at overcoming Confederate defenses. For example, the Union Army began to focus on flanking maneuvers and the use of artillery to soften enemy positions before launching infantry assaults. The Battle of Fredericksburg also underscored the importance of logistics and supply lines in determining the outcome of military campaigns. The Union Army's difficulties in crossing the Rappahannock River and maintaining supply lines during the battle highlighted the need for better planning and coordination in future operations. These lessons would be applied in subsequent campaigns, such as the Overland Campaign of 1864, where Union forces under General Ulysses S. Grant sought to outmaneuver and outlast the Confederate Army. Political developments and public opinion impact on Northern morale and public opinion. The Battle of Fredericksburg had a significant impact on Northern morale and public opinion. The staggering Union casualties and the failure to achieve a decisive victory were a severe blow to the Northern war effort. The battle's outcome was widely reported in Northern newspapers, and the graphic descriptions of the carnage shocked and demoralized the public. The defeat at Fredericksburg fueled growing discontent with the Lincoln administration and the conduct of the war. Many Northerners began to question the competence of Union military leaders and the feasibility of achieving a swift victory. The battle also intensified political divisions within the North, with critics of the war and the administration using the defeat as evidence of mismanagement and incompetence. The impact of Fredericksburg on Northern morale had long-term consequences for the Union war effort. The loss of public support and the erosion of confidence in the government's ability to win the war created challenges for the Lincoln administration. It forced President Abraham Lincoln to take a more active role in overseeing military operations and to make difficult decisions regarding leadership and strategy. The Emancipation Proclamation and the shift in war aims. The Battle of Fredericksburg occurred just weeks after President Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation on September 22, 1862. The proclamation declared that all slaves in Confederate-held territory would be freed on January 1, 1863, unless the Southern states returned to the Union. The defeat at Fredericksburg raised questions about the Union's ability to enforce the proclamation and achieve its broader war aims. The battle's outcome also influenced the political debate over the Emancipation Proclamation and the shift in the Union's war aims. Critics of the proclamation argued that the Union's focus should be on restoring the Union rather than abolishing slavery. The defeat at Fredericksburg provided ammunition for those who opposed the administration's policies and sought to undermine Lincoln's leadership. However, the Battle of Fredericksburg also reinforced the administration's commitment to the Emancipation Proclamation and the broader goal of ending slavery. The realization that the war would be long and difficult strengthened the resolve of Lincoln and his supporters to pursue a more comprehensive and transformative victory. The Emancipation Proclamation, which took effect on January 1, 1863, marked a turning point in the war and signaled the Union's commitment to ending slavery as a means of securing victory. Impact on Confederate morale and public opinion. While the Battle of Fredericksburg was a significant victory for the Confederacy, its long-term impact on Southern morale and public opinion was more complex. The victory at Fredericksburg boosted Confederate confidence and reinforced the belief in the invincibility of Lee and his army. However, the battle also highlighted the challenges of sustaining a prolonged war effort. The Confederate victory at Fredericksburg did little to address the underlying issues facing the South, such as resource shortages, economic instability, and the strain of a protracted war. The battle's outcome provided a temporary boost to morale, but it did not alter the fundamental realities of the Confederacy's situation. As the war dragged on, the initial euphoria of victories like Fredericksburg gave way to growing war weariness and disillusionment. The Battle of Fredericksburg also had implications for Confederate political developments. The victory reinforced the authority of President Jefferson Davis and the Confederate government, but it also raised expectations for future successes. The failure to capitalize on the victory at Fredericksburg and achieve a decisive outcome in subsequent campaigns contributed to growing frustration and divisions within the Confederacy. The human cost and its long-term effects. The devastating casualties and their impact. The Battle of Fredericksburg was one of the bloodiest engagements of the Civil War, with Union forces suffering over 12,000 casualties and the Confederates losing around 5,000 men. The sheer scale of the losses had a profound impact on both armies and the communities from which the soldiers came. For the Union, the high casualty rate at Fredericksburg was a stark reminder of the human cost of the war. The loss of so many men in a single battle had long-term effects on the Army of the Potomac, which struggled to recover from the devastating losses. The battle's aftermath saw a decline in morale and a sense of futility among Union troops, who began to question the effectiveness of their leadership and the feasibility of achieving victory. The Confederate Army, while victorious, also paid a heavy price at Fredericksburg. The loss of experienced soldiers and officers had long-term implications for the Army of Northern Virginia, which would face increasing challenges in maintaining its strength and effectiveness as the war progressed. The battle's toll on both sides underscored the brutal nature of the Civil War and the sacrifices required to sustain the conflict. The impact on civilian populations. The Battle of Fredericksburg also had significant long-term effects on the civilian populations in and around the battlefield. The town of Fredericksburg itself was heavily damaged during the fighting, with many homes and buildings destroyed or looted by Union troops. The civilian population suffered greatly, with many residents forced to flee their homes and seek refuge elsewhere. The destruction of Fredericksburg and the surrounding area had lasting consequences for the local economy and community. The town's infrastructure was severely damaged, and the process of rebuilding and recovery would take years. The battle's impact on civilians also highlighted the broader effects of the war on Southern society, as the conflict disrupted daily life and imposed significant hardships on noncombatants. The experiences of civilians in Fredericksburg also had implications for the broader conduct of the war. The destruction and suffering caused by the battle raised questions about the treatment of civilians and the rules of engagement in a civil war. These issues would continue to be debated and addressed as the war progressed, influencing the development of military policies and the treatment of noncombatants. The legacy of the battle and memory and commemoration. The Battle of Fredericksburg left a lasting legacy in the memory and commemoration of the Civil War. The battle's significance as a Confederate victory and a Union defeat ensured that it would be remembered as a pivotal moment in the conflict. The high casualty rate and the dramatic nature of the fighting made Fredericksburg a symbol of the war's brutality and the sacrifices made by both sides. In the years following the war, the Battle of Fredericksburg became a focal point for commemoration and remembrance. Veterans from both the Union and Confederate armies returned to the battlefield to honor their fallen comrades and reflect on their experiences. The establishment of the Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park in 1927 ensured that the battlefield would be preserved and remembered as a site of historical significance. The legacy of the Battle of Fredericksburg also extended to the broader narrative of the Civil War. The battle's outcome and its impact on the war's trajectory became a subject of historical analysis and debate. Historians have examined the battle's significance in shaping the course of the war and its implications for military strategy, leadership, and the broader social and political context of the conflict. The broader trajectory of the Civil War. The turning point of the war. The Battle of Fredericksburg is often seen as a turning point in the Civil War, marking a shift in the conflict's dynamics and the strategies employed by both sides. The Union's defeat at Fredericksburg highlighted the challenges of conducting offensive operations in the Eastern Theater and forced a re-evaluation of its approach to the war. The battle's outcome also reinforced the Confederacy's confidence and its belief in the possibility of achieving independence. However, the long-term effects of the Battle of Fredericksburg also contributed to the eventual Union victory. The lessons learned from the battle influenced the development of new tactics and strategies that would be employed in subsequent campaigns. The Union's ability to adapt and overcome the challenges posed by the Confederacy's defensive positions ultimately played a crucial role in securing victory. The Battle of Fredericksburg also marked the beginning of a more aggressive and determined Union war effort. The realization that the war would be long and difficult strengthened the resolve of Union leaders and the Northern public to pursue a comprehensive and transformative victory. This shift in mindset and strategy would be critical in the Union's eventual success. The impact on the Western theater. While the Battle of Fredericksburg was fought in the Eastern theater, its long-term effects extended to the Western theater as well. The Union's struggles in the East highlighted the importance of achieving success in the West, where Union forces had been making significant gains. The focus on the Western theater as a key to winning the war became more pronounced in the aftermath of Fredericksburg. The Union's victories in the West, such as the capture of Vicksburg in July 1863, were seen as a way to offset the setbacks in the East and to apply pressure on the Confederacy from multiple fronts. The strategic importance of the Western theater was reinforced by the lessons learned from Fredericksburg, as Union leaders recognized the need to exploit the Confederacy's vulnerabilities and to achieve decisive victories that would weaken its ability to sustain the war effort. The road to Appomattox. The long-term effects of the Battle of Fredericksburg can be traced through the subsequent campaigns and battles that ultimately led to the Union's victory at Appomattox Courthouse in April 1865. The battle's impact on Union strategy, leadership, and morale influenced the course of the war and shaped the decisions made by Union commanders in the final years of the conflict. The Union's ability to learn from the mistakes made at Fredericksburg and to adapt its tactics and strategies was crucial in achieving victory. The determination and resilience demonstrated by Union forces in the face of setbacks like Fredericksburg were key factors in the eventual defeat of the Confederacy. The lessons learned from Fredericksburg contributed to the Union's ability to sustain a prolonged war effort and to overcome the challenges posed by a determined and resourceful enemy. The Battle of Fredericksburg was a pivotal moment in the American Civil War, with long-term effects that extended far beyond the battlefield. The battle's impact on military strategy, leadership, political developments, and public opinion influenced the course of the war and shaped its eventual outcome. The lessons learned from Fredericksburg contributed to the Union's ability to adapt and overcome the challenges posed by the Confederacy, ultimately leading to victory. The human cost of the battle and its impact on civilian populations underscored the brutal nature of the war and the sacrifices required to sustain the conflict. The legacy of the Battle of Fredericksburg in memory and commemoration serves as a reminder of the war's significance and the enduring impact of its events on American history. In the broader trajectory of the Civil War, the Battle of Fredericksburg marked a turning point that influenced the strategies and decisions of both sides. The Union's ability to learn from its mistakes and to pursue a more determined and comprehensive war effort was crucial in achieving victory. The long-term effects of the Battle of Fredericksburg highlight the complexity and significance of this pivotal engagement in the history of the Civil War.